Welcome to the Building Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Austin Tennell, and today I am excited to share this conversation that I get to have with a friend and colleague here locally in Oklahoma City named Sam Day. He is an architect, an urbanist, and an infill developer, which is a really unique combination of skills to be someone who's designing buildings, also able to design and create urban spaces with those buildings and advocate for policy and changes and things like that, as well as actually going out and finding raw land and getting it financed and facilitating the building of actual buildings in the built environment, which is what we call development. So we start off talking about his path into architecture and urbanism development in his first project, which was a quad project in an infill setting, which could be interesting to a lot of people because we even talk about some brief specific things about how to finance on an FHA if you don't have a lot of cash. And then he's also done some great rows of attached townhomes and live work units that are really interesting. I'm going to split this podcast in two because we had fun and we talked for nearly 2 hours. So we'll go through Sam's story and development and some of those details around finance. And we'll really end this part one with talking about a land value tax and what that is. And then in part two, that will drop probably about a week later. We just continue talking about what it means to retrofit suburbia and how really today we can do more things to facilitate good development and building a better world for everyone. Hope you enjoy. Sam, thanks for coming on. You rode your bike over in 15 degrees over how many miles was it? 2-3 miles?
Yeah, two and a half. Felt good. It's my one hard thing for today.
Yeah.
We'll see about your questions, but
yeah, that's impressive. So excited to have you on and really wanted you to start just talking a little bit about your career path from really how you started and what you're doing now. And I'll let you kind of take some time to talk through that.
Sure. So I went to architecture school at University of Oklahoma straight out of high school. Kind of knew that's what I wanted to do. And it was my last 2 years there that I started getting interested urban design and development, really. You know, the first 4 years we did all kind of suburban projects and very low density. And then towards the end, we did a ULI development competition, and our 5th year project was really urban. I started getting interested in development. I then went to work for an architecture firm here in Oklahoma City, worked on a few buildings, worked on a form-based code in Yukon, which is a suburb of Oklahoma City. I think it's the first form-based code in Oklahoma City. So that kind of got me interested in zoning as well, and just seeing how much zoning affected the world we inhabit. And after working there for a few years, I went off and joined a startup firm, and it was me and one other guy, and we didn't have a ton of projects since we just started and we're both young. And that got me thinking about doing self-initiated work as an architect. Say, hey, if we can't find clients, can we just go out and make our own work? That's when I started thinking about actually becoming a developer. And I went to a small scale developer boot camp. It was in Duncanville, a suburb of Dallas. I think it's 2015. It was the first one that now called the Incremental Development Alliance put on.
Where was the one you went to?
It was in Duncanville.
You said it was the first one?
I think it's the first one, 2015. So it's
hilarious. I went to the second one in San Antonio.
Wow.
That is too funny. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's 100 people or something. Yeah. I heard John Anderson talk at CNU.
Right.
I think it's Savannah, maybe.
I met you at Savannah.
Yeah.
Did I know you before that? I might have met you once because I knew who you were somehow, but I remember talking to you in that room, in the Inc. Dev room in Savannah, because you were starting on the fourplex. You hadn't done it yet.
So maybe it was the one before that I heard John Anderson.
Okay.
It was Dallas. I heard him talking Dallas. And then Savannah, I'd start. Yeah. So I identified, 30 lots that I thought this would be suitable to develop a fourplex. Lots that had, let's say, walk score of 60 up, but like good lots that were on maybe busier streets. Is my preference, because then the really, really nice homes don't want to go there. And the price of the lot probably might not be as high. And so I sent out letters. None of them were for sale. Sent out letters to 30
Nice.
different
You did
owners.
that whole
Got
thing. I love it.
3 responses back, and ended up buying probably the best of the bunch. I think it was the best lot.
Wow. So you did that through sending out letters.
Sending out letters. County assessor got all the addresses.
And like, how many did you
Sent
say
them
you
all
had to
out.
send out?
I think I sent out 30. There's
And that's
30
not
lots.
crazy. That's a pretty. I mean, to send out 30 and get an amazing lot. That's a pretty
Well, it's
huge.
two responses, less than
Yeah.
10%.
I'm impressed though. You know.
Yeah.
That's cool. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it was lucky. It was lucky
Yeah.
timing,
Right. You only get lucky though when you send them out.
You gotta do the work. You gotta actually cast the lure and
Right.
to get lucky. So yeah, and then spent some time working on that. I mean, I came in it with no money. It was credit card debt and all sorts of things to
Okay.
get that thing built. And
Because you were working on your own, or were you at the firm still with one other guy?
I was at the firm, so this was kind of nights and weekends, and we were working a lot.
Yeah.
And then I went to work for Wheeler, so I was working on the architecture surrounding the Ferris wheel out at Wheeler. Blair approached me to hire me full time to go and do design for Wheeler. It was right before.
And Wheeler's a local T&D new urbanist community here in Oklahoma City.
Right. I figured they would know since you do so much work on it. Okay.
I'd like to say things just in case. I never know.
That's good. So as I was going to work at Wheeler, we started breaking ground at homes around the same time I was breaking ground on my fourplex.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what was your role at Wheeler, like town arc, or like what was the? I mean, because you did a lot. You had your hands on a lot of things there.
Starting out, I was just designing homes and doing a little bit of urban design, so like street lights and street trees and stuff like that. And then house design. I mean, we hired some outside architects, mostly kind of CNU connects to do some of the plans. I did probably 75% of the home plans kind of in the first round, which is a really good exercise for sure. And then I worked for Wheeler 2.5 years before, Blair and I kind of broke off and said, we're going to start this company where we buy land from the district and do vertical development, stuff that sort of doesn't fit within the typical single family ground up model, but also isn't quite commercial it's too small for a commercial developer to really be interested in.
It's that missing middle.
It is, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
and it's interesting that it's a different,
there's so many ways that it's missing middle, right? It's missing middle in terms of zoning. It's missing in terms of
there's none existing.
Well, and it's literally not getting built, but it's not getting built because there's no financing for it. There's no zoning for it. Even trades, you think about a lot of very few GCs are set up to do projects that small. I mean, there's just that size, I guess. And so there's so many things that have to happen for us to get the missing middle engine, I think, going again.
Yep.
But the first is developers, right? What kind of developer, if developers are just getting paid, 3% on a project, they don't want to go do $1 million project, $500,000 fourplex or something in Oklahoma City. That's just not, why do that? Why not go ahead and go do the 12 unit one or the 250 unit Texas Donut? That stuff is so much more appealing to them. But if I'm doing the architect too, right? If I can take on that role, it's easier for me to do this smaller stuff. Right. Because I get paid as the architect as well. So there's enough meat on the bone, and it's interesting enough for me to want to do it. Yeah. And so Blair and I started that. I did a little bit of architecture for fee. I did the brewery there in Wheeler. Yeah. And then really got going doing some the live work townhomes there, some small attached office product, fourplexes, and then now I'm working on some larger apartments, just 9 unit, 12 unit. Oh, cool. That kind of thing.
That are going to go in Wheeler.
That's
awesome.
Yeah. And a lot of those, some are going to be pre-con deals where we've identified an investor and basically contract for them to buy it before we've broken ground or
Right.
while we're under construction, right? And it's a good deal for me in that I don't have to worry about lease up.
Right.
I don't have to worry about managing the property. I don't have to worry about market risk. But it's a good deal for them because they kind of know what they're getting from us. We've built this stuff before, and they can go tour it, and they can tour it while it's under construction. And they also don't take on any of the construction cost risk. Like
Right.
we saw that in 2020, it'd be a huge thing that just wiped out a ton of pro formas.
Mhm.
So we're kind of partnering and sharing risk in that way.
Yeah.
But it makes it a lot easier for me that I can really just focus on the financial model and the product type and the design,
It's
and
pretty
not have to worry about this
cool.
management stuff that often comes with being a developer.
All right. So you're going to developers or like investor type people, or kind of like both investor developers
More,
type
yeah, kind of savvy investors.
savvy
let's
investors
say.
that want to have an interesting
small-
mix.
Yes.
Okay.
It's just, so far it's just been like, I haven't dealt with really much partnership and stuff. It's just kind of like one person.
Yep.
It's like, hey, I don't want to deal with the
Yeah, you're not dealing with a
middleman
fund
of
or
the
something.
fund and LP and
Mm.
all that, right? I want to just take one thing and I own it. I decide when to sell it. I decide when to raise rents or
Got it.
all that, right?
And the
So
numbers pencil for them, even on new
I
construction,
do
smaller
numbers.
product. Yeah.
So I probably sell it we sell generally a little bit cheaper than what we would be getting if we developed it and stabilized it and then took it to market. But I make sure, like, before I am going to even do the deal, I want to make sure that I sell it to them at a yield that's sufficiently above what I think the market is, so that when they buy it, they could theoretically sell it for a little more, just because I want to acknowledge their risk
Right. Right.
of the times they're going under contract, putting a deposit down, and
Yeah.
market changed during that period.
Right.
Interest rates could change, so that's part of it. But I do all that financial modeling before we even decide to go to pitch.
It's really
it to
interesting.
them.
How did you learn to do that? Because that's pretty unusual. Like architect,
Yeah.
also architect doing development and finance, and also architect. There's a lot of different
I
skills
started
and things.
like the financial modeling.
Yeah.
Started with in school.
Okay.
Right? ULI student competition. Tried to kind of got my feet wet doing it there. Did it again for my fourplex, and just a few projects after that too. I mean, then I went to. We didn't talk. I went to and got my master's at
Right.
Berkeley in real estate development, where I really learned how to do financial models and learned that
Okay.
I
okay,
don't,
Yeah.
but realize that for the projects I'm doing,
You
it
don't
just
need
doesn't need to be that complex.
Right.
It's like the Excel stuff really is not that complicated. I would encourage someone who's familiar with architecture, familiar with building generally. You can do that,
Right.
right? That's
Yeah. You can watch some YouTube
It's
videos
really-
and like buy a template for $10.
give yourself some time to familiarize yourself with it. But
Yeah.
the important part is like getting your assumptions right, getting your construction costs right, getting
Yeah.
your rents right, and getting your operating expenses right.
Yeah.
The complex, I mean, for most of these projects, I'm doing a static pro forma, so I'm just looking at 1 year snapshot,
Right.
like the year it's leased.
Right.
That's it. I'm not doing a complicated like
Right. You're not getting IRRs
3,
and
4
stuff.
year
And yeah.
exit. Yeah,
Right.
I don't, because I don't even model.
You don't really
exits.
need. Yeah. It works or doesn't. Pretty basic.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of stuff like the 2 fourplexes I'm going to have, those are long-term holds, or I'm selling it kind of
Right.
immediately.
Was that first one, by the way, was that an FHA? How did you finance that first one?
It's
So it
an
was FHA.
Yeah, so I
And
lived in it.
for how much percent down? So you were able to, whatever you're comfortable talking about.
Yeah, 0 basically.
It's not even 3.5%.
It's 3.5, but that's loan to value, right?
So
it's
right. So as long as you get your
I'm doing the sweat equity, the architect, all of that.
right.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty like amazing note is just that you can build a fourplex if you get the design right and the numbers work right.
Yeah.
Construction costs, you can do it with almost 0% down.
yeah,
Zero cash if you're willing to move into it for 1 year for your primary residence.
Right. And
then rent
it's
out the
harder
other
in
3.
more expensive markets. It's harder because of interest rates now.
Right.
And you have to lean on another paycheck from somewhere, right?
Right.
The FHA and Fannie
Right.
Freddie loans are basically loans against
Yeah.
your income, which are collateralized by the property, not so much loans
Right.
against the property income.
Yeah.
Now, loans will count some of that projected income, but it's still hard to make that work in a high cost
Interesting.
market. Really hard.
And do you think, so you're an architect, so you already had like knowledge about design and building, right? And I know you, if I remember correctly, you hired a GC because you're kind of like, I don't really want to mess with that.
Yeah.
So obviously we know that, like, I actually personally think architects are probably the best positioned people to be small developers.
Yeah.
I don't mean a tradesman or builder can't. That was the way I got into it. I kind of went the other way as I went through building and then learned design and then development. But I mean, just generally speaking, an architect, just like knowing how a building is designed and things and site planning and stuff is a really strong, and you just need a little bit of pro forma help. You can hire a GC,
Yeah.
and be a small developer. Most people don't think about that. I'm curious if you were to take out even the architect piece and just say kind of your normal person that's looking to invest, and rather than the stock market, they're like, man, I've got 50K or 100K. I'd love to do something interesting. And I don't just want to give it even to a fund to go do something or go do some big real estate. I just want to build a fourplex. Could they, do you think, hire an architect or find a fourplex plan, use a GC, get it built, and like, could a normal individual like do that? Do you think? I mean, obviously they've got to be.
Yeah, I think for a project that's small, it's easier if you wear two hats. If you can be the developer plus, at least you're gonna lease it and manage it, right?
Right. Rather than a property manager.
If you're gonna hire an architect and if GC, maybe you're just a sub. Maybe you do some work on it. Like that's even that. Not to say you can't. You certainly could do it. Again, it depends on the market, though. These are much harder to pull off and higher cost kind of appreciation markets compared to markets that are more cash flow based and cap rate. So, I certainly think more people should be doing it. I think people who are in the trades, people who are real estate agents, people who are GCs and architects all have a leg up.
Yeah.
And starting it, and they all have disadvantages, right? I think architects fail at this a lot because they're just not hawkish enough on costs.
Yeah.
Right? They just go over.
They're like, well, this looks good.
Yeah. But architects are the best position to do test fit, right? They know building codes. They know like how to lay out. They can lay out something.
They can facilitate the project, I think, the best, maybe just through the city and entitlements.
And
entitlements
I think that's as well.
What it is.
Architects are going to be the best test fit entitlements. Like they have that experience, right? But you see a lot of architect developer. It's just
but you're right. And you're right. Like I said, like a GC could totally do it. Like a fourplex
going to be the best
so easy.
on cost.
Basically,
the best on cost.
Yeah. I mean, you just hire an architect to get a fourplex, get them through, and then you can just build the whole dang thing. I mean, I think so many builders could take advantage of that. And I should say, because we're talking about an FHA loan and blah blah, and the meaningful part of that is that you are allowed to buy up to a fourplex on a conventional mortgage or an FHA, which basically just means it's the easiest to qualify for. It's got the longest amortization schedule, so 30 years, just like if you were to buy a home, versus if you buy a commercial building, or what's considered commercial, you have to go to a commercial loan product, and it might be a 20-year amortization, higher interest rates, and hard to qualify for. So that's why it's kind of like a hack, you could say, that the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they allow purchasing up to fourplexes with just a conventional mortgage, and most people don't know that, because you can buy your single-family house, that's what everyone does, but you can do a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex, and it's really, really cool. Go to fiveplex, and suddenly you're in commercial.
Totally different world.
So, that's why we're kind of talking about that.
You still need to find a loan for construction. I don't know anyone who's gone through. I think FHA might still have a product that you can do a construction to permanent loan. I don't know anyone that's used it. I've heard it's a little bit tedious in terms of the draws.
Got it.
In the construction period. So you still need to find someone who's going to lend you the money to do the construction, and then with the takeout of the FHA on back. Now,
got it.
Probably not going to lend you 90% on that. So there needs to be some more money probably in there somewhere.
Got it. Okay, that's good.
Or collateral.
Right. You could pledge something, or you got 100K equity in your house, something. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's cool. I want to. That's great. I think it's just awesome. I mean, I guess I think that's really how we make our cities better. Is I have a lot more faith in not big developers doing big things. I hope there are big developers doing good big things, but I really think the richness comes from, smaller people
Yeah, I mean,
that care about. That's what I love about you. You're like, and the second fourplex, you're like, I'm going to buy a house next to the fourplex I built. You know what? Now I'm going to build a second fourplex right there because this is my neighborhood. Like, I'm going to treat this as my backyard that I'm going to invest in and make better over my life. And I think that you cannot beat that. Like, because yes, you're having to look at a spreadsheet. The profits have to make sense, but like you're adding another value to it beyond just profit. And I mean, really, it's kind of funny to say. I don't mean it in a cliche way, but it's like you can't make something great without love, I would say.
Totally.
And just having that extra component. And if you're just an investor that's investing somewhere where you've never been or across the street, it can only be about a spreadsheet. It's not that you're a bad person. It's just you can't care about a place because you're not there.
That's right. So I mean, yes,
I love that part.
It's has to make money. It has to pencil. But it's also like there's so much value in it for me in terms of I have leased out that fourplex to my friends. Like it's all my friends living there. We haven't since we've had our kid. We've stopped doing this, but we used to do nightly dinners for everyone in the fourplex and ourselves. So cool. Like it's just like there's a great community that we could create out of that or help foster. And there's just that's immeasurable, right?
Yeah.
That quality is immeasurable. So
yeah, no, I totally agree. And more fulfilling.
Yeah, and more fulfilling. It totally is. It's like I think a lot about this sort of decline of average household size and like just how much more spread out and you know it's the loneliness epidemic and things and like how do we, you know, as designers, how do we design better for that? How do we design for better communities, more interactions? There's so many ways we can get it, whether it be better third spaces, more programming through institutions or more density, or there's just like a lot of ways to get it. But me as an architect, like I have to think, okay, what are the buildings I can design that better facilitate like families by choice, you know, or just better communities. It's hard for me to imagine a community in a 300 unit apartment complex. Right. It's not that it couldn't be, but it's hard for me to imagine.
This is actually, Brandon, I want to go to the Retrofitting Suburbia next, but when you said 300, it reminds me too of scale makes such a difference too, because I know you are the landlord of the fourplex that you own, right? Like you are the owner of that building. The people that live there are not owners in the building. But how much more, even if they weren't your friends, say they were just all strangers, but how much easier is it to take some ownership of a very small building? Like if you're one of 4 residents, to like feel a sense of, it's not something you own, but like I can put flowers out and it like, I feel like this building is part of, you know, I'm one of 4 owners of the building that lives here versus I'm one of 300. Like you can't feel any kind of ownership over something that's 300 units, you know.
Like, you mean in a condo situation or something where you own a piece.
Yeah, or a condo, or even just a rental like a fourplex where you might be renting, but it's just the scale is brought down, and I think you're just a little bit more. It's not guaranteed, but it just is kind of a bit of more of an invitation to care for it.
I think so. Yeah, I think you could still do that okay at scale. I think to me that's partly a problem of just spaces that the ownership is ambiguous, common corridors and things like that, where, you know, I think if you're designing places like, say it's a build to rent neighborhood, but it's all townhomes, it could be 300 townhomes, right? But they're That's small and they all have stoops and porches and things that are defined as like, this is, I've even seen in like a Texas donut style double loaded corridor apartment where the designers put like a little shelf or something outside the door where a tenant can like leave it, and it's, you know, it's not much, but it's something. It's something where it's like, hey, this is mine. People put something out there.
They customize. They make it their own.
Yeah,
you know?
And so it's just less repetitive, a little bit of something. So I think those spaces are really important for like what you're talking about, like giving this person who lives there ownership to control it and like make it feel like their own and improve it. So in my first fourplex, everyone has their own entry door. There's no interior shared area. Yeah. And everyone has their own little porch as well. And they're all just 1-bed units. But someone throws out some chairs, and people don't hang out there that often, but it feels really like nice, you know, you're coming home. There's a gesture. There's this is kind of the space where my private world and the public world intersect.
That's cool. Well, let's I want to talk about a little bit about this idea of retrofitting suburbia, and I don't mean that in this. I know like people use that term a lot, and maybe they mean something very specific about it, and I kind of mean it broader. I just mean in the situation we're in most cities across the country, especially in the Midwest, whether it's Oklahoma City or Kansas City or Rochester, New York. We everyone that's on board at this point, like most people, at least that are kind of in the philosophical realm that we're talking about, like, yeah, we agree with getting rid of parking minimums and changing our zoning, exclusionary zoning. Like a lot of people, just normal non-architects, non-developers, things like that, who at least have an understanding of that, like they generally agree with it. Yeah. Generally. And so now for me, it's just a matter of time of that's just got to make its way through the system and get changed through a highly bureaucratic system. It's going to take a while. But beyond that, what are some of the things that you're thinking about of things that we can be doing or could be doing or should be talking about, or maybe other people are already talking about? And one we were just chatting about right when you walked in is a great one to start with, is a land value tax. Yeah. So maybe you could start off with describing what a land value tax is and how that is different from what's happening now.
Sure.
In most places.
So much. I think you're right. I think more and more people are realizing, the built form we have today in America, let's say that emerged after the 1950s, is failing people in terms of loneliness, and it's failing in terms of global warming, CO2 emissions, and it's failing in terms of accessibility and affordability for a lot of people, especially as family sizes go down. There's a lot of thoughts I have on retrofitting suburbia. The land value tax specifically, so that's an idea that goes back to Henry George, who said that, right, all the improvements, all the innovations we make basically accrue to land value. That is, any gain to efficiency at all in the economy, it makes land more valuable. You can imagine, like, a farmer comes up with an invention. He rents his farm and he comes up with an invention that he can double his potato production, right? So twice the profits, right? So he gets twice the profits the first year, but then his invention spreads. And all of the farmers have the invention to double their potato yield. Who really gets that is the landowner, who raises the rent to the point at which the highest point that it can yield, that the farmer would stay there still and get enough profit to survive, but no less. So
can you say that last part one more time?
So the landowner, the landlord is able to raise the rent, right? Because the farmer's making more money and he can pay it, and he's going to, because the landlords everywhere are going to raise the rent. So Henry George's theory was all gains to productivity accrue to land value. They're gobbled up by landlords. And if you go into the sort of urban, so that's land rent. The urban theory of land rent is that, well, people basically will only live within an hour of a job. And every time a new company comes into town and opens a new factory, or we come up with a new invention, AI, whatever, it gives people more money in the beginning, and then all the landlords just raise the rent to mop up all of those gains. And so Henry George's theory was, well, we should since the value of land is created socially, that's kind of the next jump, that land has value not because anything you did, right? It was just land. Its value is social, is created collectively, and then any improvements are made individually. So his theory was you should tax land to the point that it's worth zero, and then not tax any of the improvements that are made on the land. So none of the buildings get taxed, but just the land that it sits on is taxed to the point that it's worth zero. So what that would do in theory, and there is some of this in Philadelphia, and a lot of the East Asian tigers have kind of been built up on this premise from Henry George. But what this would do in theory and in practice in Singapore and Hong Kong and these places is that you would have to sort of build out land to its max productivity or give it up, right? It would force people to stop doing parking lots, to stop doing kind of big backyards, and make them put their land to the most productive social use as possible, or just most profitable use. And it would make them, pay a lot in taxes relative to what their land is producing economically. Now, you could get into some issues, right, in more rural areas. Farming, for example, I think it's a little bit more complicated, at least for me to imagine how a land value tax would play out there. I mean, I suppose the tax they pay on farms is basically land value. There's not much improvement, but there's some improvement.
Right.
He's a really, really popular thinker around the turn of the century, I think, is when he was born. So, it's kind of almost contemporaneous with Marx and stuff. I think it's just after. But he was very, very popular back then. I think he kind of fell out of favor as we developed the highway system, until all of a sudden there was a lot of new land that opened up, and the idea that land was our constraint sort of became less popular. But now, kind of as we were talking before we started the podcast, I think as traffic has started to increase in a lot of these places, or we've just sort of put a cap on how much we're willing to develop in places like on the West Coast, or just, let's say, supply constrained places where they're just like, hey, no more building, we're done. It's too hard. We're not entitling any more units. I think all of a sudden these ideas have sort of come back around, and people are like, wait a second. All the economic gains we make are just going to rent. Right. So how do we fix that? And land value tax is one theory to try to make landowners put their land to higher and better use.
It's really interesting. I think that was an awesome explanation. That was actually the best explanation I've ever heard. Curious, just like a technical question. When we say tax the land, when you say tax the land to zero, so basically the land is valued at $100,000. What do we mean? What do you mean by taxing it to zero? Is that over a year, over a long? Like, what is it?
So
that's the value in the millage rates or something,
right? So, like, let's say there's a lot next door. That's worth. I mean, anytime you do a development, you kind of come up with the residual land value. You say, hey, here are all my rents, here are all my costs, plus I got to take a developer fee, and then the rest left over is what I would pay for land, right? That's a land value, that residual land value.
Right.
Now, when you're talking about land and the speculative value, it could be anyway. It gets really a lot more complicated, or so complicated I don't even know what we're talking about. But if you say tax the land to zero, that is, I am as a governing entity, I'm going to put a tax high enough that the land is valued basically at zero. So if it's $100,000, a good way to think about it would be a parking lot. Like, let's just say a parking lot's kind of the zero use of land. I'm going to tax the land so that I'm going to put my tax exactly at the net revenue of operating a parking lot on this parcel.
I see.
So in that case, the net revenue is zero.
Right, because it's valued based on NOI, essentially. Like land is out, on cash flow, the revenue you can make. Okay, that clarified that for me.
So basically, try to end land speculation. Now, trying to calculate that's pretty hard.
Right, I was about to say, well, that's a definitely follow-up question, but you just said something I think is important, and the point is to end land speculation. And can you talk about why that is a problem? You can see it in Oklahoma City, and you can see it in a lot of other cities too.
Totally. Right. One is that we, as a city, collectively, we have to maintain all the infrastructure and all the schools and we have to maintain all the services to that land, while that landowner is paying very little in property taxes for the right to just wait and see if it becomes more valuable. Right. So, it's really bad in cities where developers can just, or land speculators can just get it out in front of a big public infrastructure project. Like, I announce that if I'm doing a new subway stop, or I'm doing a new highway, or I'm doing a new park, right? And all of a sudden, all this social value we created is just going to someone who read the announcement and went up and bought all the land around it real quick, right? Versus, again, let's go back to the kind of East Asian tigers. What they'll do is, well, all the subway companies, or they're mostly public, except like Japan, will also be sort of development companies. They'll say, okay, we're going to build a new station to finance that. We're going to buy all the land or do a special tax around all the land to capture all the new value we create when we build that subway station.
Mm-hmm.
So the danger of, so you kind of went off to go back to your question, why do we want to end land speculation? It's because we collectively, socially have to front the cost basically to service that land without really getting any benefit, right? And then on the other hand, it's just like we have taxes that are foregone compared to if it was development. We have jobs that are foregone compared to if someone developed it. We have housing that's not there compared to if someone developed it. So it's in the public interest to fraud these land speculators, force them into doing something.
Basically, it spurs a ton of development, I would assume, right? Like,
the danger is it could spur it too fast. And it could be too crappy. All of a sudden, landowners panic and have to throw up not great stuff.
But I can see how because there's multiple spots around Oklahoma City and like I said, and so many Midwest cities, but like where there's just areas where near really good areas that have a bunch of even vacant land sometimes, or single family detached houses that are like 700 square feet on 7,000 square foot lots, within a half mile of downtown. And you're like, and they're 100 years old and falling down. Yes. I should say too. And it's not a bad, and so here's where, because I do understand, I think I overall understand the positives.
Yeah.
I also know, and I want to talk about these too, some of the downsides that I've heard before or have thought of, which I think the main one, or just a big one, is the idea of gentrification, which you hear about a lot. And because I remember I was in Austin, actually, no, it wasn't for that, but I was in Austin like 8 years ago, and there was a big deal back then. And their property taxes are high in Texas because they don't have an income tax. And I can't remember exactly what was going on, but whoever I was with, they were complaining about how they were basically using, and this is this person's story. I have no idea if it's true, but this person's story is the city was basically using taxes to just kick out poor people and then move rich people in so they could do whatever they want. Now, granted, I'm using their words for that. But I can see how that is possible because like we could be living in my house right here where we're sitting. And the next year they say, your house isn't worth what it is right now. It's actually worth double that. And suddenly I go, oh my gosh, I can't afford to live here anymore. And I could have been here, whether it's 2 years or 10 years or 20 years. And something like, I have to move. And I don't think there's something where you're just going to make everything, you're not going to make everyone happy and accomplish all the goals. But like what do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah. So I think the problem is where you try to overlay land value tax onto existing development. You say, okay, there's a house next door that's on the same size lot because we laid out the neighborhood on the same size lots. That one's 200,000, mine's 400,000, but our dirt's worth the same, right? Should we pay the same tax? And now all of a sudden it gets kind of regressive.
Yeah.
Right. It's sort of like, wait a second, that person makes less, lives in and it's great to have the mixed income neighborhood, but now they get taxed more. Now, if a neighborhood was developed with a land value tax in place, that probably wouldn't have happened, right? It would have been that, well, maybe you wanted the 50-foot lot and wanted to pay for it, but that person's probably going to say, wait a second, this is a smaller house. I have to put it on a smaller lot.
Right.
Which is the more, ideally the city more developed. Right. But there is, I think, some issues with trying to overlay land value tax onto existing.
And so you're kind of thinking about it like where it definitely works, you're thinking is on vacant property essentially already.
It works better on very urban type stuff. I think it gets, or on just vacant stuff. It gets trickier, I think, at the fringes where suburbia intersects farmland, and all of a sudden maybe it's like, you accidentally encourage sprawl out here.
Right.
And then it gets trickier when you overlay to existing neighborhoods with smaller houses on bigger lots.
Right.
Another way to do this, and this is way far out for the U.S. probably to ever do, is just say the government just owns all the land, like Hong Kong and Singapore, and you just rent the land.
Huh.
So it kind of takes away the problem of everyone trying to throw up developments to get highest and best use. The government says, okay, we're leasing these few parcels, and you 10 development companies, you bid on it, tell us how much rent you'll pay. This is what you can develop, sort of these parameters.
Right.
And then you get a 99-year lease on the deal.
Interesting. I could see that like in certain areas. I think just as a blanket rule, that would terrify me of just like
it requires a really sophisticated government that really knows what they're doing and is in coordination with developers. But Singapore and Hong Kong both basically run under those regimes where land is owned by the government, and most of the development is still private.
Interesting.
Singapore still does some public, but it's a private developer. And in Singapore, they have a public side developer too that competes with the private.
Right.
But it's that works maybe in part because these are small areas and require really close coordination on land use. But that's another way to use this principle without doing the land value tax, which probably not going to happen in the United States for multiple reasons. Land value tax has happened here.
Right. I was about to say, and I know some people, I think there's some that are in place right now. And I know Kansas City, they're talking about it again. Or at least they got to follow.
I mean,
Trevor
George was the extreme version of tax it to zero, right? I think the more possible approaches are, okay, you pay double the rate on your land as you do the improvements, right?
Got it. So there's other, there's more
charge you a little bit on the house, but we're really charging you more on the land. And
it's an interesting concept because the main reason that I'm very open to the idea is I just know too many being in this field of just wealthy people.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with wealthy people. That's not what I mean. But like they're just holding on to land in very valuable areas where or even impoverished areas, frankly, like where they could, genuinely, we need more help, all sorts of stuff we need. And it's a lot of land and it's just locked up and has been locked up and they might wait another 20 or 30 years.
And meanwhile,
because they can wait until someone could just offer them, I don't know, $100 million or whatever it is. And it's like, that's not good for anyone.
No,
that's not good for the city. And you're talking about once again, if you're out in farmland, okay, whatever, you taking up a lot of land, but in a growing urban environment, it seems wrong because it's really just super enriching them over a long, while hurting everyone else, or can be over a long period of time. But my biggest reservation about it is kind of the opposite of that is me as a small business owner, and I just put or just really anyone, I'm saying like, you know what, I want to build a fourplex here. And I go build a fourplex, the numbers work, and then 4 years later, the government's telling me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't, literally I can't cover my building and I have to sell it now. And can I even sell it and make money? Because maybe you can, maybe that's the whole point. If I can sell it and cash out and make a couple $100,000, but it's still, there's this thing of like, I feel like I don't really own it. And I heard someone make this argument on, he's a new urbanist guy and like a biker. I can't remember his name on X, Andy something. And he was talking about, he did a thread on how the land, he didn't really like it because it's like you don't really own it or something.
But you never, my argument I think is you never really own it, right? You're relying on the government to enforce your property rights through force and legally. You're reliant on the infrastructure. You're relying on all of these things and you don't ever really, really own it. Property tax is still a form of rent, right? From the government. And again, if there is no government at all, the land has no value because there's no one to enforce your own.
See, I think we might have seen the same because he actually was addressing something like that because it was someone else. They were talking about how if making the exact same argument without a government, like no one really owns anything to enforce it. But
I didn't see that,
I wish I could remember it, but he was making an argument like, actually you can just by force and stuff like that. And
sure, but then it's your word against mine. We've done that before. Yeah.
No, that's interesting. Okay, well, I'm going to be curious to keep my eye on that because I know other municipalities are considering it. And I would really like to look at just where it's successful and where it's been successful because it seems like it's got some really positive use. Because what we currently have does not work in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I know that. I just don't know, is that the solution? Is it part of the solution? Is it part, how do you...
we've looked at, some of the entitlement, the right to build upzoning the fourplex, right? We've gone... Minneapolis has done it, Portland's done it, and basically the entire state of California has done it. And we haven't seen much uptake, right? We haven't seen much building out of that. I think they're getting like 200. They've gotten 200 units in 3 years in Minneapolis. Portland's doing a little better. You know, it's like 200
Wow.
a year, 300,
That
but
is
it's like it's really not a lot. And it's kind of to what we were talking about earlier. The missing middle is missing for so many reasons,
right.
and one of them is just there's not developers that want to build for houses, right? You need someone who's either an architect or so we need an army of these people to go and do it. And so I think we need to start looking at other solutions. We have to know that, hey, the ADUs are great, fourplexes are great, and they aren't enough. They're not, like, just legalizing them isn't enough.
Right.
No,
so
not. Land value tax. So that's the carrot. Maybe the land value tax is a stick that starts to, push people to do more with their land.
Right.
What I don't want to see, I don't think a good retrofit suburbia solution is like for us to tear down neighborhoods and start over. Right. It represents a lot of history there. There's a lot of embodied carbon. There's a lot of memories. There's a lot of reasons to not do that. But these neighborhoods aren't working at these densities in a lot of ways.
Right.
Like, because again, with family sizes, average family sizes being cut in half over the last 50 years, it's like they're half the density. They can't support schools anymore. They can't support the coffee shop anymore. They can't.
Yeah, if you believe Urban 3 or Chuck Marone and Strong Towns,
they might not be able to support the infrastructure.
Right, like, and maybe you can afford it, quote unquote. Now we're not. I don't think generally as a country speaking, or even municipalities, especially growing municipalities, we're really not feeling the pinch of what we've done yet. We will, though. I personally believe in, like, our lifetime, over the next 20, 30, 40 years, like, we're going to be feeling that pinch of, just like our federal government, we got whatever, $34 trillion of debt, and then our local governments and stuff that even Edmond, which is a very conservative, fiscally conservative run municipality, you could say, or at least just from my understanding, they run in the black, but if you take into account deferred maintenance on infrastructure, they're actually in the red by $20 million a year with a city of 100,000 people. And $20 million a year is easy to push off for a year, but that's the problem, is everyone in power, everyone that's kind of, and I don't mean, I'm not talking those city councils, I'm making a general statement, but like, we who exist today are more worried about our current condition than what the condition is going to be like in 60 years. And it's, and that's a natural human thing.
Yeah, it's a problem for sure. I mean, the whole system is dependent on growth, right?
And debt. Growth and debt.
Debt is dependent on growth too, right? An overall debt system, you have to grow. I mean,
to be able to work.
In some ways, maybe my criticism of the Chuck Marone crowd and stuff is like, well, yes, that's true. I think the Ponzi scheme they've sort of identified is real, but it's also maybe true of just all capitalism. Like, you have to grow to keep the debt going, and it has to have debt to keep the capital growing at the right rate to really be a capitalist. And I mean, I don't know. Maybe some countries like Japan and others have proven that a more steady state is possible.
Yeah.
But it's certainly something that I'm worried about too. Is the infrastructure, and like, can we continue to pay for all this stuff, or does the quality just sort of, is it a huge deferred maintenance bomb?
My guess is you're just going to get, like, over time, houses start falling apart because they're really not built that well. People stop really being able to maintain them because it doesn't make financial sense to maintain them, because your appraisals, you maintain your house and your neighbor's not, you're never going to get your money out of it. And unless you're just super wealthy, why would you do that? Like, and then the infrastructure starts slowly going downhill, and then there's not money to cover it. And then you're kind of far out. So then it's like crappy houses getting worse, infrastructure getting worse. Wealthy people are going to move out and move to the nice areas. And then you're going to get concentrated poverty on the periphery, kind of the opposite of what's happened now. Where the concentrated poverty was urban core. I think that's going to go right back out. And then it's going to be really horrible because, I mean, when you're in suburbia, how do you get to work? How do you get to school? You have to own 2 cars. You got kids. I mean, it's really going to be interesting. So you're right. Like, retrofitting suburbia is going to be important. So I'm curious, like, I want to talk about, I'll bring up kind of e-bikes at the end of this. But before we get to that, what are some of the other things you think about, and whether that's several things we want to talk about loosely, or cut 1 or 2 you want to go a little bit more in depth in, but you think about in terms of, like, how do we think about retrofitting suburbia? Sure. Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, I've got some ideas, but it's a thorny issue.
It is a thorny issue. And, like, I mean, you look at the so much of thought on city design, city planning is kind of greenfield. You know, even CNU, it was like sort of greenfield. Is all the successful CNU developments are kind of drive to urbanism, and it's hard. It's hard. How do you come back? And not only is it hard to even think about it, it's certainly hard to pull it off. One of the things I worked on is actually my master's thesis at Berkeley was like a transfer of development rights thing. So in neighborhoods, transfer of development rights is where you can basically sell air rights. You can say, hey, I have the right to develop 20 units here, but I can't use it, or I don't want to because I have a historic building. I'm going to sell it to you, my neighbor, so you can take your 20 units and my 20 units and build 40. And I worked on something like that for residential neighborhoods. It's used in commercial sometimes. But so if we gave everyone the right to build 4 units on their property, but a lot of them don't want to, can't, could they sell those rights to a developer who could come in and tear down maybe one house in the neighborhood and build a 16-unit apartment on the corner? Or do something like that.
So it'd be like, can you use this neighborhood as it would be like if I had everyone has the right to build, you say like 4 units on a property?
Yeah, 4 units. So in Oklahoma City, in your neighborhood, right, I could pay $5,000 a unit if I was a developer. I could pay, and I could say, I come to all the neighbors, right? You probably want to limit how far the transfer could go.
Right.
But I could, knock doors, or more likely it'd be an automated system, and say, hey, I'm a developer. I'm going to build a 16-unit apartment on your corner. I want to.
On your corner being like, not my property?
Not your property.
Like,
next door.
Got it.
Can I buy your zoning rights?
Oh,
can I pay you? Can I cut you a $20,000
So
check?
rather than, it's not necessarily like everyone's putting 4 units on their property. It's
no.
within
Let's
a
radius.
radius.
So that we can tear down as little as possible while adding as much as possible without then your 4 units are gone. So no developer can come and say, hey, I'm going to tear down the whole block and build 150 or 200 units.
Right. So you're preserving the neighborhood.
Trying to preserve the fabric of the neighborhood, trying to preserve the embodied carbon, the memories, the culture, all that's important to me. But then something that said, hey, it's easier and better for kind of maybe to just tear down one corner house and build at least, how it takes so many units, or a big enough project to me to make it worth it, tearing down a house.
Right.
And you want to do as little as possible.
Right.
So that's one thing that I think.
That's interesting. I've never heard of that.
Yeah. ADUs have been somewhat successful, but it's really not adding that much, it's adding not that much density. I think about there's I think it was Project for Public Spaces kind of did the rule of 10, or that you sort of need 10 places to make it a real place.
Got it.
But I always think of the rule of 10,000. I need 10,000 residents to really support maybe a coffee shop,
right?
Or even a small grocery store, right? It's kind of a lot of these things start to happen about 10,000 people, and you think about it, even CNU, if we're doing densities at 5, 6, 7 units an acre gross, we're still only bringing in 3,000 people within a 15-minute walk
it's really
radius.
It's really not very much, because Wheeler's about 7 right now, right?
I think we're probably about so Spoke Street's at 30.
Yeah, see, that's why Spoke Street's my favorite.
30 is kind of the magic number for me, because it's that's 10,000 within a walk radius.
I like that. Okay, yeah.
And it's about the threshold where you might be able to support transit.
Right. And
you can still build it all. Walk up, stick build, 3 stories.
Yeah. Oh, that's
and fee simple.
Yeah.
Right. So it's it's the cheapest threshold where I can build and really do everything really walkable and possibly even have transit.
See, and I think there's kind of a magic to that kind of that's why we call it the missing middle in some ways. But it's so important to talk about the scale of what you're talking about. I think is a beautiful place for people. Yeah, there's places like Japan and all that, and I guess I haven't been over there, so I can't tell you what the experience is like for my own. But for me, that kind of 3-story, maybe 4-story, that's what really creates a beautiful city and a fabric city. Yeah, you can have some tall buildings taller than that, but I definitely don't mean 8-story apartment buildings like that. What you're doing in Spoke Street is just really perfect kind of scale.
Yeah,
not for everything, but for
I'm biased towards
centers, for centers, urban Yeah.
I mean, it's how we built a lot of Philly, all these row house cities, right? That was
Yeah.
like how it got done, and it
Right.
was for those reasons when you could the ownership regime, everyone could still own their own parcels for the
Yep.
most part. You could stick build it
Yep.
all. I mean, a lot of that wasn't, but we can
Right.
today. It's somewhat affordable. It's same kind of price per square foot ish as
Right.
building single family detached.
Yeah.
And we can
And you can still get the privacy. You can build it in a way where you get the privacy, like sound and all that.
Yep. Yep.
And
I can do a coffee shop if I live in the whole neighborhood of all that.
Yeah.
And count on there being enough residents who can walk to my coffee shop, so much so that I don't have to build a parking lot.
Yeah. That's. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll drop part 2 next week. Please comment below and let us know what you think. Like, subscribe, and share, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.